Mandukya Upanishad, Pranam Mantra. Om Bhadram Karnebhi Shinuyama Deva Bhadram Pashe Makshabhirya Jatra Sthirairangaye Stustuvagung Sastanubhihi Vyashema Deva Hitam Yadayuhu Swasti na Indro Vriddhashava Swasti na Pusha Vishwaveda Swasti nastaksho Aristanemi Swasti no Brihaspatirdadhatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. We start with the third section, verse number 5. We covered verse number 4, the previous talk. Just to remind you, understanding Vedanta is a bit difficult. What I mean to say is, it's not that easy. Because, see, not only Vedanta, even Ved, you need to have a little contemplative mind unless you go into some kind of contemplative mood. It might be difficult for you to grasp these ideas. I've been talking to some of my good friends who listen to these talks, and they agree to this, that it's quite difficult to grasp some of these ideas because you are continuously trying to understand and grasp these ideas intellectually. But what we are discussing is not from the intellectual world, something higher, something deeper, something more subtle. This requires a complete quiet mind. Mind has to be absolutely quiet. And in that silence of mind, in the quietness of mind, spiritual truths seem to bubble up. They will. In the previous verse, Atman was compared with Akash. We had a detailed explanation. Akash, which is sky, which is space, and says that however many divisions that might be in Akash, depending on different objects, Akash never gets affected. Sri Ramakrishna used a very beautiful example. There is a pond on the water. Now you put a stick. Now you have a divided pond. Water this side, water that side. But is the pond really divided? No, it's not divided. So, oh, so my good friend Son is here after a long time. So, Mr. Son, it might be slightly difficult for you to grasp because you have been missing some of these talks. But anyway, today's talk is very interesting because there is space and there are objects, and space is enclosed in that object. The better way of understanding the entire thing is think of buckets. Think of, say, 10 buckets. Now, each bucket will have some space. This is what body and mind is in relation to Atman. The way you have pots or, say, bucket. Think of open field and you keep 10 buckets. Now, this space gets divided into those 10 containers. There are 10 containers. Now, you have 10 different space, or say in a room, within a room. You make divisions. Now, room is divided into 10. But has the room been actually divided? No, no. Here lies the crux of Vedanta. And as we shall see, Vedanta has nothing to do with the intellect. Vedanta has nothing to do with the mind. Just that we try to understand Vedanta with the help of mind. And that's why a lot of confusion comes. What we are discussing is that, okay, fine. Here is, let's say, 10 jars, 10 buckets. Now, if one bucket carries a dirty water, will that be affecting the overall space? No, it will not. Will that be affecting other buckets? No, it will not. The contention is, the idea is, those of you who are truly interested in Vedanta might have heard some of these objections by different schools of thoughts, particularly the Vaishnavas. And the Vaishnavas, I mean, they are so orthodox that you can call them fanatics. And derisively, they call Vedanta as Mayavad. It has nothing to do with Maya. Atman is Brahmavad. Atman talks about Brahman alone exists. Atman alone exists. But this is what happens when somebody wants to give you a bad name. They will use words which you don't even stand for. Words that you never spoke. You might have noted that those who quarrel with you, very often they put words in your mouth. So in philosophy also the same thing happens. The common objection towards Vedanta, and the most common objection, even greats like Ramanuja and Madhva, they tried to attack Advaita Vedanta exactly on this point of Maya. That means one will be affecting the other. Now, what we are going to discuss, fortunately, is not very difficult. If you just listen to it very carefully, you will understand the arguments. And this is very important because this is the most common argument used against Advaita Vedanta, that if everything is same, if me, you, and everyone else, we are same, then if I get liberated, everyone else will get liberated. If I do something wrong, then that will affect everyone else. This is the most common argument. In fact, this argument has been used many times by different schools of philosophy. Even Swami Vivekananda, when he was in America, he was working on this and he tried to write write down the points, rationally explaining why is it that the liberation, mukti of one, will not liberate others. So later he wrote a letter to E.T. Study where he explained this thing. Now, when Acharya Shankar is explaining, he's explaining in his way. When Swami Vivekananda is explaining, he's explaining in his own way. And when I am explaining, I am partly taking something from Shankaracharya, something from Swami Vivekananda, because they are the masters. Whatever we have to explain, we have to take help from these masters. So, basic contention, basic objection by the philosophers, thinkers, and quarrelsome people is, if Atman is one, then if one person is liberated, everyone should be liberated. In fact, worse, if one person dies, everyone should die. In fact, Swami Vivekananda uses this argument in a different way and says, if you think yourself to be Atman, then the happiness of others will be your own happiness. But he is telling it as sadhana. He's telling it as sadhana. Now, when people criticize, they criticize entirely for different reasons. This verse number 5, यथैकस्मिन् घटाकाशे रजो धूमादिभिर्युते न सर्वे संप्रयुज्यन्ते तद्वत् जीवा सुखादिभिः. As the dust, smoke, etc., soiling the akash enclosed in a particular pot, do not soil the other akash. You have 10 buckets, and now one particular bucket is filled with smoke or dust. That will not affect other buckets. So also the happiness, miseries, etc. of one jeev do not affect the other. Acharya Shankar writes a very beautiful commentary on this, but we will have to explain it slightly differently so that you can understand it. Just remember that the idea is, if there is only one Atman, then happiness and misery of one should affect the happiness and misery of others. Like you might have heard that in case of twins, their minds are so intertwined that the feeling of one affects the feeling of the other. And there have been cases when one died, the other one also did not survive for long. So is it something like that? The answer lies, the crux lies in a very, very simple statement and very simple truth that Atman is not mind. Dear listeners, dear viewers, try howsoever you may, and try howsoever I may. It is practically impossible for us to make a distinction between Atman, pure consciousness, with mind. The distinction between Atman and mind, it gets cracked only during deep meditation. So persons like Swami Vivekananda had insight on how Atman and mind are different only after meditation. And Sri Ramakrishna, of course, he had so many different kinds of spiritual experiences and spiritual sadhana that he should not be brought into it. Happiness, misery, bondage, liberation, all these things belong to mind, not to Atman, mind it. Some of you might find me being repetitive. I have no option, because unless I feel that I've made the idea clear, I'll have to go on repeating the idea. So, in case the idea becomes clear to some of you, please have patience. The entire discussion here and a bit later hinges on this simple fact, or you can say simple dichotomy, simple contradictory feeling, understanding. Is Atman the mind? All those who attack Advaita Vedanta, with due respect to our greatest of acharyas, they all mistake Atman for mind. When they attack Advaita Vedanta, actually they attack thinking that Atman is mind. With my all humility, with indeed due respect to all the masters. Now, when it comes to scientists and wisecracks of the society today, we do not worry about them. They're basically very shallow people. What Acharya Shankara does, he takes up two systems of philosophies, and through these two systems, by attacking these two systems of philosophies, Acharya Shankar very distinctly shows how Atman is not mind, and why these kind of objections cannot be raised against Vedanta. Now, first of these is Sankhya. As we proceed, the idea will become clear why Acharya Shankara has taken Sankhya and Vaisheshika. In the Orthodox Indian philosophical system, there are 6 schools of thoughts. First is Sankhya Yoga. So by answering Sankhya, you are answering Yoga. And third and fourth are Nyaya and Vaisheshika. They are twin philosophies. So if you counter Vaisheshika, you have countered Nyaya. Then there is Mimamsa and Vedanta. So they don't bother to answer Mimamsa on these points. But as far as the issue of Atman and mind is concerned, If you can answer Sankhya and Vaisheshika, you have answered every system of thought. Is this clear? The objection is, whatever your objection regarding Advaita Vedanta, ultimately it boils down to one single point, that Atman is mind. Is Atman the mind? We have been discussing it many times. Just please keep this thing in mind, that whatever the objection against Advaita Vedanta, whatever the objection, actually all these objections hinge at one single point, that Atman is mind. They are thinking that Atman is mind. Acharya Shankar now attacks two philosophies, Sankhya and Vaisheshika, and shows how Atman is not mind and what their philosophical premises are. They are flawed. So, if you can demolish these two, Sankhya and Vaisheshika, you have actually effectively demolished every system of thought that attacks Advaita. Now, we will just go through the main points of Sankhya and Vaisheshika and how Acharya Shankar counters. According to Sankhya philosophy, which Swami Vivekananda termed as mother of all Indian philosophies, Sankhya treats consciousness and matter. And matter and energy, they are same. It's very interesting that it's Sankhya philosophy. In Sankhya philosophy, Prakriti is the mother of both matter and energy, and matter and energy, they are all same. It's very interesting, very interesting. Just imagine that Einstein came much later with this idea that matter and energy are same, but we have known it all along that matter and energy are same. Sankhya says that there is matter and energy, let's call it Prakriti. That's the better word because everything is put in one single word. Matter, energy, mind. All these three are contained in one single word, Prakriti or Pradhan. Pradhan means the head of all creation. And there is consciousness. Now, this consciousness and Prakriti, known as Purush and Prakriti, they have independent existence. They have permanent existence. That means energy and consciousness, they are independent. They always exist. There is no way that one will merge into the other. More importantly, Sankhya says, consequently, Yoga says that there are infinite number of Purusha. So energy is infinite, Purusha is, the number of Purusha is infinite. And that is how the creation goes on. When infinite of one mixes with the infinite of other, you will have infinite number of creations. That's simple, very simple argument. Now, Acharya Shankara says that when you come attacking us, Sankhya, which is an extremely major philosophical thought, those of you who are more interested in knowing about Sankhya outlook and how Sankhya looks at energy, consciousness, multiplicity of Purusha, you can listen to our Raj Yoga talks. And when I say our, actually, our talks are elaborate and systematic. No other reason. If you feel that there is someone whose talks are good for you, you can listen. But I will always advise you to listen to my talks because I try to be systematic. Now, first, Acharya Shankara brings up Sankhya and says that look, even Sankhya's system of thought, which is very, very important system of thought, admits that misery, etc., do not belong to Purusha. What Sankhya calls Purusha, Vedanta calls Atman. Swami Vivekananda had very famously said that Sankhya and Vedanta are same. In fact, in his commentary on Gita, we have talks on Gita in English. If you're interested, you can see. And there we have mentioned this Acharya Shankara's argument where he says that when it comes to elaborating the process of creation and details of creation, Sankhyas are very good. But when it comes to talking about the ultimate reality, Sankhyas are not good. By Sankhyas, I mean followers of Sankhya. That includes yoga. Now, if you study Sankhya and Vedanta side by side, you'll find that there's just one step missing. Everything that Sankhya talks about Purusha, Advaita Vedanta talks the same about Atman. Whatever Sankhya discusses about Prakriti, Advaita Vedanta accepts in entirety. Just one single point goes missing. Between Sankhya and Advaita, there's just one step missing. God knows why Kapil Muni, who founded Sankhya system of thought, missed that. Very difficult for me to say. Maybe he was trying to work out a practical philosophy, because both Sankhya and Yoga, they are extremely practical philosophy. India has not produced a more practical philosophy than Sankhya and Yoga. And that one single step is multiplicity of Purusha. Sankhya says Purusha are infinite in number. Advaita says there is one and only one. Effectively negating the independent existence of matter, energy, and mind. If there is, actually a very simple argument. It takes little time to understand. But once you understand it, you say, wow. It's one of those eureka moments. Once you can understand what Advaita Vedanta says by one, if you have one, it is neither subject nor object. Because the moment you say eternal subject, eternal witness, you are talking about actually two. I have seen many of these Vedanta speakers, when they talk about eternal witness, Sakshi, and all that nonsense, the idea that is formed in the mind of the listeners is always of two. Because when you are witnessing something, there will always be a sight. Without a sight, you cannot have a witness. That's not what Vedanta says. Vedanta says, whatever is. There is no mind. And because there is no mind, you cannot go on telling there is subject, object, and all that. So Vedanta basically, rather effectively, gets rid of matter, energy, and mind. We will have more of it in the next verses. So, does this solve the problem of Sankhya? No, it complicates the matter. As we have been seeing from the very beginning, it complicates the matter massively, because the moment you say that Atman alone exists, there will always be problem of this multiplicity. Where from this multiplicity comes? And is this multiplicity real or apparent? Now, if you say real, actually people admit it to be real. People think it to be real, like Christians and Islam and Judaism and Vaishnavas, they all accept it as real. But that even a kid can say. Even a small boy knows that he and the universe, these are two different things. Why do you need philosophy to know that? And of course, whenever there will be two, there will always be a third to control that. The moment you bring in mind, there will always be two, subject, object. And there will always be a third, God, the ruler. You don't need philosophy for it. It's a very simple logic. Because if two are to be put together, if two are to be joined together, you always need a third force. If there is subject and object, you will always need a God. And that's why whatever science may say, whatever these wisecracks may say, whenever you have subject-object duality, there will always be a need for God. And this is where some of these basic religions, they prey upon their followers. That made Marx say religion is the opiate of the society. But why you need philosophy to know this? So what Advaita Vedanta says that, well, it appears to be many. Actually, there is no many. So whole argument is based on this. Vedanta first takes up Sankhya and says that even Sankhya philosophy, that means anyone who understands the idea of consciousness, and modern science doesn't understand. Every time modern science tries to explain consciousness, it is mostly trying to explain the volition aspect of the mind, emotional aspect of mind. That's the ultimate. That's the ultimate that they can think of. And they don't understand consciousness. It's beyond them. It's beyond any Christian or any follower of Abrahamic religion to understand what is consciousness. And anything that is based on Abrahamic religion, it's impossible for them to grasp what is consciousness. Yeah, I might sound a bit firm in my understanding, a bit strong, but I'm correct. Now, Shankaracharya doesn't even answer those people. He just says Sankhya. Sankhya himself says. Kapil himself says that Atman is not affected by misery, etc. So the allegation that the misery of one will affect the misery of others, it doesn't stand. He's using Sankhya. Vedanta is not coming directly forward. It will come. Vedanta will come later. Now, in Sankhya, whatever is happening is done by Pradhana, that is Prakriti. And whatever it does for Purusha. But Purusha remains indifferent all the time. The witness. In case of Sankhya, the witness term is perfect because Purusha keeps watching the play of Prakriti, not Vedanta. So all these expressions like Sakshi, etc., they are more real with Sankhya than with Vedanta. So says that Pradhana works for Purusha. However, this premise that Purusha works for Prakriti works for Purusha in no way explains why there should be multiplicity of Purusha. Actually, this is a very interesting argument. Those of you who have studied Raj Yoga or those who have some knowledge about Sankhya, philosophy of Sankhya and philosophy of Yoga, they are all same. This is a very interesting argument Acharya Shankar uses, that Sankhya gives all the reasons why Purusha and Prakriti are different. And all those arguments you will find in Raj Yoga. And how Purusha is not mind, we have discussed in Raj Yoga. You might find one thumbnail, one caption. Why Purusha is not mind. So Vedanta doesn't go in detail of offering the explanations. It just borrows one thing from a very powerful system of philosophy. And the way I am telling this, just listen to our talks on Raj Yoga and you will know why consciousness is not mind. It has been discussed in Raj Yoga talks. This is my good friend San. He says that my first talk on Raj Yoga is my best talk on yoga. But it's not that. That's because he likes it. So what Shankara says, first he uses his arguments, Sankhya's arguments, and then demolishes Sankhya. This is known as Pradhana Malla. Pradhana Malla is the chief wrestler. First you bring in the chief wrestler, the most powerful wrestler, and use him to defeat all the wrestlers. And then you go and defeat the chief wrestler. You don't have to go fight with each and every wrestler. He uses Sankhya, demolishes the idea that Atman can have any sensation. In the Western science, consciousness is all about sensation. In Vedanta, Atman is beyond any sensation, yet it is pure consciousness. Now, Vedanta says that there is no argument, there is no premise in Sankhya and Yoga philosophy to prove, to tie up Pradhana with multiplicity of Purusha. You don't need. That's why in Gita, I'll remind you once again that if you are interested in understanding religion, spirituality, and religious philosophy of the Hindus, you should listen to our talks on Gita. That Gita harmonizes the philosophy of Sankhya with the outlook of Vedanta, where it says that God alone has become both the higher Prakriti and the lower Prakriti. Lower Prakriti is mind, higher Prakriti is consciousness residing in each jiva. That means it's a pure consciousness itself that becomes both mind, consequently matter and energy, and remains as embodied consciousness within all. But that's a different topic. So he says that the arguments offered by Sankhya does not prove in any way how presence of Pradhan require multiplicity of Purusha. It's a fact. There is no special argument in Sankhya philosophy to prove that there is multiplicity of Purusha. Because Sankhya makes a mistake. In fact, in Raj Yoga you find it says, first it counters the idea that mind is consciousness. And then it says there are infinite Purusha. Why? Otherwise, if one gets liberated, everyone else will get liberated. This is very interesting argument because see, Sankhya, which demolishes every other system of philosophy on the basis of mind, itself lands in that trap. Because according to Advaita Vedanta, bondage and liberation both belong to mind, not to Atman. But Atman is ever free. In fact, Sankhya also says Purusha is ever free. Purusha feels as if it is trapped in Prakriti. Prakriti, this world, this universe goes on dancing on its own. Sri Ramakrishna gives a very beautiful example of this, that marriage ceremony is being organized in a family, and there the housewife, because you see in India, and maybe in the West also, particularly in Italian families, the first lady of the house, she is the head of house affairs. So when marriage ceremony is being organized, she looks after all the arrangements, and she comes once in a while and informs the chief of the house. And the chief of the house is sitting and smoking on his hubble bubble hookah. And he just nods his head. According to Sri Ramakrishna put it in the story form, he says in the story form. And this is the philosophy of the Sankhya. Prakriti does everything, Prakriti goes on doing everything. And Purush keeps on watching its dance and gets entangled and starts thinking that all the dance is being performed by him. And finally, when he gets bored by each and every of these dance, with each of, he says no more. And the moment he says no more, he realizes he was never into this. Now just see how Sankhya's outlook is absolutely same as that of Vedanta. The problem lies only with multiplicity and oneness. Because the moment you get rid of multiplicity, the problem of this one related to multiplicity comes up. Now Acharya Shankara uses the argument by Sankhya, demolishes all those who consider mind to be consciousness, and then says that okay, fine, but in your own philosophy, in Sankhya philosophy, there is no reason to assume that simply because Pradhan is doing everything, there will be multiplicity of Purusha. Actually, there is none. And I know Raj Yoga very thoroughly. I have studied Sankhya. I know there is a weak point. I really wonder why really a great says like Kapil, he went into this. Somehow where, this problem, Many people are nowadays listening to Vedanta and they come and ask us through mails these very questions because idea is not becoming clear to them. If you go for pop Vedanta, this is what will happen. And Ajay Shankar says, Sankhya has absolutely no other argument in support of multiplicity of Atman, multiplicity of Purusha. It's very interesting. They don't have. They have only one, and that is liberation of one will effectively liberate everyone else. But no, Vedanta doesn't say that Atman gets liberated. Every time we say that I get liberated, every time we say that I want mukti, we don't even understand what we mean by mukti. Because, see, my dear viewers, let me explain. If your mukti is real, that means your bondage is real. If your bondage is real, mind it, you will again fall in bondage and there can never be mukti for you. Anything that is real can never go away. Imagine there is husband and wife. Your husband and wife have a quarrel one day. If the quarrel is real, after some days the quarrel will start once again. But if you are not husband and wife, there is no question of quarrel. If a lady and gentleman they are quarreling, you don't know whether they are husband and wife, they are a couple or not. If they are not a couple, there is not going to be any quarrel ever again because they will not be meeting ever again. But if they are a couple, then the possibility of another quarrel is very much there. It's a very simple argument. I mean, there's nothing. It's not a rocket science. If your freedom is real, so if you get a divorce from your wife, the possibility of your getting married again and having the problem again and trying for a divorce again is very much there. Such a simple thing. So Acharya concludes, it is only through ignorance that people imagine Purusha to be many. I'm not sure if you are convinced with whatever we discussed. To remind you, Acharya Shankar is not giving any fresh argument here. Some fresh arguments will come now after this. He is just using Sankhya as Pradhana Malla, the chief warrior, the chief wrestler, to demolish every other system. That means if you want to know how a particular system has been demolished, you will have to study Sankhya. And that's why I said if you listen to our Raj Yoga talks, the ideas will become clear. In brief, Sankhya is a very powerful system of philosophy, very clearly shows how, not only philosophically, it says that if you meditate in a particular method and you grow, slowly you will see for yourself that you are separate from the mind and that whatever is happening is just a sight and that you were never involved with it. There is no theory in it, there is no philosophy in it. It's a hard fact. And then comes, after this, Acharya Shankar takes up Vaishesika. So, the most sound philosophy was taken up and shown that how they themselves have a loophole. What? They simply say that there is Prakriti, that is conglomerate of matter, energy, and mind. And whatever it does just to appease the Purusha, just to make it happy, just to keep it entangled, or just to show its wares. In earlier times, I don't know how the markets work now. When we were kids, if we ever went to a shop, wanted to see something, the shopkeeper would show us a variety of things. I we found nothing to our satisfaction, we left the shop. Purusha is just like that. But Prakriti being real, the possibility of that Purusha getting entangled once again is very much there. Such a simple argument. But if you know through meditation that this game of Prakriti, it's all imagination, you were never under bondage. And actually, you are always free. So there is no question of freedom. There is no question of acquired freedom. So you can never again fall in this kind of imagination. It's over forever. It's like knowing that this part of the desert offers a mirage. Acharya now takes up Vaisheshik philosophy. Now, Vaisheshik philosophy is nearer in this sense to modern day science, to our modern day understanding, to modern thinking. Nyaya and Vaisheshika, they run on Padartha. Padartha means anything that can be denoted by a word. It's a very interesting thing. We have a talk in Hinduism series on Vaisheshika, Nyaya Vaisheshika. You can listen to that, but it's not really necessary. Vaisheshika, Vishes, they say their foundation of philosophy runs on simple premise that anything that can be named is a padartha, is an object. They use the term padartha. Padartha means ultimate reality for them. Now they say the reality is dravya, matter. It's a reality. Qualities. And then karma, action, karma. And that's how this karma theory of karma has become so popular in Indian outlook. Then generality. Generality is things that are common, say, in a group, like cows have two horns. This is generality. And there's particularity known as Vishes. And that's how the name Vaisheshika has come, the speciality. And there is relations. Relationship is relationship between one and the group. And there is samavaya. These are not very important for us. So this is samavaya. And then there is abhava. Abhava is non-existence. Now we are not going into the details what Acharya Shankara has said to contradict the relationship between mind and Atman. Just that much will do for us. Now Vaisheshika says, Sankhya says that misery, happiness, etc. do not belong to Atman. And Vaisheshik says that desires, etc. are inseparably related to Atman. So see the just talent of Shankara. He picks up two philosophies and they are opposed to each other. Sankhya says misery, happiness, etc. do not belong to Atman. And then he demolishes them. And now he picks up Vaisheshika. And they believe that misery, happiness, etc. are integral and intrinsic to Atman, the way modern science treats. So when science is today discussing this problem of consciousness, we have handled this long ago. Vaisheshik actually, Nyaya and Vaisheshik both, they talk of Atman as having these qualities of Vaisheshik, of happiness, misery. So liberation is real for them, and mukti is real for them, bondage is real for them. So, sanskara, the impressions, yoga uses sanskara a lot. Sanskaras are the cause of memory. My memory is why? Because I have impressions. I come across some experience. That experience leaves an impression. It goes in the subconscious. Now, Freud did a lot of things on that. When the opportune moment comes, that impression, it's like, computer virus. Virus stays there. And when the right time comes, right opportunity comes, it strikes and shuts down the entire system. Here it doesn't shut down, but the memory comes and it can flood you. Very often you will see when you meditate, when you pray, some particular thought, some particular series of thoughts, they come and disturb you. They come and occupy your space. Why? You have certain very powerful impressions related to that. You will find that certain recurring dreams are there coming to you. Some particular kind of dream. Why? Because they have certain impressions, and that's why fraud became a big man, became a big hit by combining these things. Although we have known all these things since ages. You have some experience, not only in this life. Now, Freud bases everything to this life, but we believe in past lives. Now, we have been accumulating these impressions for thousands and thousands of births. They all stay within us as impressions. And sometimes they continue to guide us, they continue to goad us simply as impressions. And sometimes they come up in dreams, sometimes as memory. The memory are the most powerful ones, the dreams are the less powerful ones, and the sanskaras, our habits, our tendencies, they are at the subtlest level. Now, what Acharya Shankara says that, look, memory cannot have inseparable relation with Atman. Inseparable relation. Because Vaisheshika says it has an inseparable relation. That means it is in the nature of Atman to have sanskara, to have karma. Because Acharya Shankar says, in case you say that this sanskar is related to Atman, in that case, memory and sanskar, they are related. Depending on what kind of impression you have, you will have that kind of memory. Says, Atman has no parts. Atman itself has no part. Atman is one solid block. Right now, we are not even going into multiplicity or singleness of Atman. We are just talking about not having parts. Mind has many parts. Earlier, we did not understand it. Now, because of neurology, we know that mind indeed has parts. Atman has no parts. Now, if Atman has no parts, then happiness and misery of one will affect the happiness and misery of others. So, happiness and misery of one will affect the happiness, misery of others according to Vaisheshik philosophy and not according to Vedanta. This is, and I tell you, I feel stunned when I see scholars and philosophers still talking about Dvait and Vishishta Dvait. What rot! It's such a simple argument. It's such a simple argument. If you believe that, for example, Western science believes in feelings as consciousness, and consciousness being one, consciousness doesn't have any part. If consciousness doesn't have part, happiness and misery of one will affect the happiness and misery of others. Now, if origin of memory lies in contact of Atman with the mind, then memory of all things will come simultaneously. If you consider Atman, which is pure consciousness, having sanskar as an integral part, then memory of everything will come simultaneously, not one by one. Memory actually belongs to mind. Because memory belongs to mind, remember, mind is not conscious itself. Mind has parts. Atman doesn't have part. If Atman had part, sorry, if Atman had part, then the very definition of Atman will go wrong. Atman has no parts. Now, if memory is an integral part of Atman, the whole thing will come simultaneously. But we know that memory doesn't come simultaneously. That means memory has to belong somewhere else. Where does it belong? It belongs to the mind, which has parts. Mind is a compound. Atman is not a compound. Atman, by its very definition, is not a compound. Because Atman is not compound, it cannot be the receptacle of memories. So the very premise of Vaishesika is wrong. In fact, that's one reason why Vaishesika couldn't become popular in India. It was credit goes to Acharya Shankar, who demolished the idea of Vaishesika. But that same idea is now taken up by the Western science. Now, Atman is ever present, as per Advaita Vedanta, is ever present. Atman is consciousness. So, mere effort of the mind to remember anything, if you just think, all the memory will come to you. Of where? Like, I'm sitting here. I want to know what's happening in America. I'll know what's happening in America. Because it's all one. If memory belongs intrinsically to Atman, then you will have memory of the entire universe coming simultaneously. And not only that, not one, all beings, because Atman is indivisible, without parts. That's the definition of Atman. All beings should remember a thing at the same time. If I remember something, you will also remember the same thing. If I explain something, you will understand the same thing simultaneously. Oh, Viresh Bhan, once again you are active. Listen to entire talks, dear Viresh. See, look, mastering a subject takes time, it takes effort. You are, again, you are missing. This is what we have been discussing, that all the differences lie in mind. And somewhere, when you are presenting arguments, somewhere you make a mistake and you think that you impose some character and some characteristics of mind on Atman. This is a general problem with every system of philosophy. And Atman being without parts, Atman doesn't have any part. So one should remember all things at one and the same time. So no rule will exist for memory. Argument is actually very simple. Mind is complex. If mind is complex and if mind is the repository of memory, then the way memory works is perfect, nothing wrong with it. But the moment, like Vaisheshika and like modern Western science, you push memory as a dharma of Atman, then these problems come. You will remember all the things, and everyone will remember all the things, and all the memory will come at the same time. But this does not happen. We know these things do not happen. So, what is the idea? Says Acharya Shankar concludes, mind can never be related to the Atman, which is devoid of all sensations. By very definition, Atman does not have any sensation. It is mind that experiences sensation. So, whatever is Atman is completely class apart from the mind. When we are talking about memory, when we are talking about sensations, these things belong to mind. Because those of you who have been listening to our talks from talk number one, it has been stressed repeatedly that Atman is pure consciousness. It doesn't go through sensations. It's like pure light. If you apply some colored glass, some colored cellophane, the light will appear colored. Actually, the light is not colored. As far as Atman and mind are concerned, they are completely class apart. Mind is finite, mind is with parts, Atman is infinite, Atman has no parts. So, two systems of philosophy, one Sankhya and one Vaisheshika, was brought. Sankhya was brought because Sankhya does not accept sensations, etc., belonging to Atman. Vaisheshika believes these to be the characteristic of Atman. Acharya Shankar demolishes both. says that if you accept that desires, etc., desires, happiness, etc., which have a beginning and an end, belong to Atman, then Atman itself will become impermanent. But by definition, Atman is permanent. So there is a contradiction. On the one hand, you say that Atman is permanent, and you are pushing happiness, misery, desires, etc. on Atman as its characteristic. But we know that sometimes we are happy and sometimes we are not happy. So happiness has an origin, it has an end. So Atman will have an origin and it will have an end. But that's not acceptable. And if you believe that Atman has parts, just to accommodate that memory is an integral aspect of Atman, well, then Atman will also change like a body. The body, the way a body keeps changing, Atman will keep changing. Then the defects of the body will always be there with Atman. So Atman will become something like the body. Otherwise, you are making, sometimes actually this is the problem. Sometimes we are treating Atman as mind, sometimes we are treating Atman as body. And we always miss to see Atman as Atman. What is the conclusion? Atman is infinite. Atman is one solid block like Akash, space. Now, if you keep different paths, Akash appears to be divided. Even in that case, the defects of one do not affect the entirety and do not affect others. I tried to be as clear as I could be. So I hope the idea is clear to you. If it's not clear, I don't know what else to do. Now we'll continue with these things and maybe these ideas will come again. And as you keep listening, ideas will become more and more clear to you. Thank you so much. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.